Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to tonight's debate. My name is Matthew Drown, and I am the chairman, and Tom Clapp is the timekeeper. The adjudicators are Mr. Morton, Miss Yan, and Mr. McCaskill. The topic of this debate is that the Olympics did more harm than good for Rio. The affirmative team seated to my right is from Pembroke. The negative team seated to my left is from Pulteney Grammar School. The speaking time for this debate is 5 minutes. A single warning bell will sound 1 minute before the speaking time, and a double bell will sound at the speaking time. A continuous bell may be rung 30 seconds after the speaking time, in which case the speaker must sit down immediately. Please ensure that your mobile phones and other electronic devices are switched off. I declare this debate open and call upon the first affirmative speaker, Charlotte Tang.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen. The topic for this debate is that the Olympics did more harm than good for Rio. We interpret the Olympics as encompassing the event itself, the media coverage, and the preparations. We define harm as having a negative impact and good as having a positive impact. Therefore, we interpret this topic to mean that the negative impacts of the 2016 Olympics, both socially and economically, outweighed the positive impacts of this event, specifically for the city of Rio de Janeiro. We as the affirmative team firmly believe this statement to be true. Today as first speaker, I will be speaking about the social aspects of this debate. Our second speaker, Ned, will be discussing the economic aspects, and our third speaker, Annika, will rebut and sum up our team's case. Today, I will be discussing 2 points. My first point is that the 2016 Olympics deeply tarnished Rio's reputation on a national scale through the heavy negative media coverage. Hosting a mega event such as the Olympics can create publicity and even offer the chance to gain international prestige, but it can also draw unwelcome attention and negative media coverage. Host nations often find it difficult to conceal the many high-profile economical and social problems that may emerge, especially when they are focused upon to such a great extent, and as a result are highly susceptible to receiving bad press on a national scale. In Rio's case, they were thoroughly humiliated and exposed, as especially with the economical instability, many problems arose, which were instantly amplified through the gossip-hungry media for the world to see. Ahead of the Rio Olympics, the media did not hesitate to harshly criticize while reporting on the situation in Brazil ahead of the Games. The spread of the Zika virus, spending hours in traffic jams, sewage in the shower, and Islamic State threats painted an excessively negative picture for the world to see, according to Russia Today, a popular television network funded by the Russian government. Furthermore, the New York Times reported that recent tests by government and independent scientists revealed a veritable petri dish of pathogens in many of the city's waters, from rotaviruses that can cause diarrhea and vomiting, to drug-resistant superbacteria that can be fatal to people with weakened immune systems. While we do acknowledge that Olympics may have had positives, and that some of the poor aspects may have been exaggerated, the impression Rio has had on the public is one of a struggling city in the middle of a political and economic crisis, which is what people will believe. In this context, the truth is less significant. Instead, it is all about the impression the media gives, as it is what the rest of the world will see and judge by. Even if the truth is that nothing too drastic occurred, a city will still be judged on how the media portrays it. Unfortunately for Rio, the media coverage was exceedingly negative for them during the course of the 2016 Olympics, heavily tarnishing their reputation. A poor reputation on a national scale would potentially deter economic cooperation, which would further damage their already struggling economy, as our second speaker, Ned, will elaborate on. Now I will discuss my second point, on the heavy social conflict caused by the Olympics in Rio, especially for the local citizens. Building new infrastructure in a city means destroying established urban areas. When that happens, local populations and communities are often displaced. That is especially true for those who live in Rio's poorest neighbourhoods, called favelas or slums. With the preparations for the Olympics, residents of the city's favelas are to host police pacification units, or PPUs, thereby causing displacement. In the city of Rio, close to 1.5 million people, around 23 to 24% of the population, lives in favelas. According to The Guardian, for the favela community on the edge of the Olympic Park, approximately 90% of the 600 residents have already been forcibly removed from their homes for a mega event that lasts little longer than a fortnight. Brazilians were optimistic that hosting the Olympics would bring tourism, employment, and strengthen the economy. To offset the financial burdens of a mega event, the government promised to clean up corruption and fix social problems. In fact, Rio's economic decline was shocking, drastically rebuking this sentiment, as our second speaker Ned will further express. The economic circumstances directly affect the social aspect. The city of Rio de Janeiro is in the middle of a political and economic crisis, and many of the citizens are experiencing the hardships that come with it. The city essentially descended into lawlessness and corruption, with the economical declination due to the Olympics. Unemployment in Rio has reached 8%, and the unemployment rate for the whole country is even higher. With economic instability comes a rise in crime. Figures show street robberies have shot up to a staggering 81% in the year, with murder also soaring up to 38% according to the Telegraph. The months leading up to the 2016 Summer Games saw Rio engulfed in political protest as the government prioritised the Olympics over anything else. Citizens took to the streets in anger, and police had to resort to violence to break up the riots. The investment in often impoverished parts of inner cities can deliver economic and social benefits for generations. With these aims in mind, the London Olympics redeveloped much of the poorer areas. 4 years on, ordinary people in less affluent parts of London have benefited from investment at a time of government cuts. The Rio Games, by contrast, will be hosted almost entirely in the city's wealthy district.
Call upon the first negative speaker, Ben McAdams.
The Rio Olympics were an opportunity for the city, but was it for better or for worse? Tonight, Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, we as the negative team will disprove the statement the Olympics did more harm than good for Rio. We agree with the opposition's definition, however we would like to add this debate is only about Rio. We also interpret it to mean the Olympics held in Rio of this year contributed more harmful things towards the city than good things, and as the negative team, we strongly disagree with that statement. I will now point out some flaws in the opposition's speech. The opposition argued the Olympics pushed the favelas aside and hid them. Instead, we argue that the Olympics brought pride to the favelas, where Rafaela Silva, someone who grew up in poverty-stricken area, won Brazil's first gold medal in judo. She is now hailed as a hero of the favelas, and she has proved people from poverty can do anything. The Instituto Raeco, the judo centre where Rafaela Silva trained, is now fully booked. Many young children have been inspired, and the Olympics have had a positive effect. Ladies and gentlemen, I would also like to remind you, you can't justify that one side of the scale, the good, is heavier than the other side, the bad. It is our belief the affirmative haven't proved their point without addressing both the harm and the good, and showing you why the harm outweighs the good, why one side of the scale outweighs another. As first speaker, I'll be talking about the history of Rio, previous Olympic cities, and the media's role at the Olympics. Olivia, as second speaker, will be talking to you about the economy, infrastructure, and transport benefits from Olympics. And Jake will rebut the opposition and summarise our team's case. My first point is that we believe it's important for this debate to put Rio in a historical context for the audience. Rio is a city famous for its carnivals, and the importance of human spirit was as evident as ever during the Olympics. However, the city still had serious problems well before the Olympics arrived. Rio was once the capital of Brazil, however it lost this status in 1960. They had high unemployment rates, high crime rates, and increases of slums and favelas. According to the Brazilian Institute of Geography and Statistics, the youth unemployment rate in 2015 at Rio was at 24%, and the crime index was at 77.9, both extremely high-risk levels. So as you can see, Rio is a city which is renowned for its constant turmoil, well before the Olympics came to town. The Games were a morale boost, the first ever South American city to host the Games. It could not have caused a pre-existing problem. The Games were an opportunity for the city to move beyond its poor past and instill a sense of pride and patriotism in its people. It did not create more harm than good. My second point tonight is that hosting the Olympics can be essential for projects that might not happen otherwise. The Olympics are about competition, heroics, and national pride. But, ladies and gentlemen, they are also about big business. Host cities invest deeply in the Games, with the hope of reaping sizable gains for their local and national economies, through tourism, marketing, and other means. Recent improvements to host cities include the regeneration of East London, with new venues now being reused, improved transportation, and the creation of a new residential district. For 2008, Beijing made lasting changes. They extended their subways, they created new roads, and most importantly, it saw them mark their return to international prominence. All these value-added bonuses, and of course the hometown pride that comes with hosting this event, were beneficial. Whilst it might not be seen now, it will benefit the host city for many years to come. Money can be replaced, but a city's reputation cannot be won easily. That is why we believe the Olympics were a valuable opportunity and one that did not do more harm than good for Rio. Finally, I will discuss the impact of media on everyone's impressions of the host city. Please remember that it is the media's job to find flaws in the lead up to during the Olympics. They are paid to sensationalise the truth and create newsworthy stories, in the case of Rio, a bad reputation. The media frequently works hard to create a negative story about the host, the city, and the committee, and the Olympics to build ratings. In 2008 Beijing Olympics, the media was engrossed in the air quality debate, yet the IOC president called it a truly exceptional Games. In 2012, criticism fell on budget and timeline issues, yet the IOC president stated the Games were absolutely fabulous. This year, it has fallen on poor water quality and security, yet the IOC president called it iconic. A much better Rio exists because of the Games. I'm sure you can see past the negative bias of the media to hosting Olympic Games and see the Olympics did not create more problems than opportunities for Rio. Tonight, ladies and gentlemen, as you are aware, the Games will build up to feel like a disaster before they'd even started. Yet we truly believe they will result in long-lasting benefits for the future generations of Rio.
call upon the second affirmative speaker, Ned Wheaton.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen. The topic for tonight's debate is that the Olympics did more harm than good for Rio. As the affirmative team, we believe this statement to be undoubtedly correct. Being the second affirmative speaker, I will now illuminate the inherent flaws within the negative team's case, after which I will move on to my own arguments. The first negative speaker stated that the Rio Olympic Games did not have a negative impact upon the favelas of Rio de Janeiro, citing the achievements of one Brazilian athlete heralding from a favela as bringing glory to the lower class of Rio. This is all well and good, but it does not change the fact that thousands of families heralding from favelas were displaced as a result of the Olympic Games, and no significant actual investment into their improvement was made. He also claimed that the Rio Olympics were an effective method of raising funds for improving infrastructure and improving quality of life within Rio de Janeiro. However, as I will discuss later in my speech, the Olympic Games are well known as a truly terrible method of raising funds, denounced by economists as a money-losing proposition. Now, allow me to begin my argument, focusing on the economic side of this debate. Firstly, the Olympic Games historically have a tendency to not turn a profit and often send the host country into debt, a situation that Rio de Janeiro cannot afford to be put into. According to an article published on the website Money Nation, on average, the host country for the Olympics suffers a $600 million loss in total, with the worst loss being the 2004 Athens Olympics, which ended up costing Greece $7 billion and is cited as one of the contributing factors to their recent debt crisis. At the time this article was published, the 9th of August, the Rio Olympics were projected to result in a $4 billion loss, making it a spectacular expense, even by Olympic standards. While the precise expense of the Rio Olympic Games has not yet been released, based upon these pessimistic economic projections and the history of the Olympic Games as a whole, we can be sure that the Brazilian government will not be running a profit. According to the Rio 2016 candidature file, the Rio Olympics have overrun their initial projected costs by almost 40%, from the estimated $14.4 billion to almost $20 billion. Evidently, the Olympics have had an enormously negative impact upon Brazil's economy, and given that Brazil's economy shrank by an enormous 3.8% last year, the largest Brazilian recession for more than 2 decades, the last thing Rio needed was a net loss, but that is exactly what the Olympics promise, as explained in a paper published in the Journal of Economic Perspectives titled Going for the Gold, the Economics of the Olympics. This paper took an in-depth look at the economic pros and cons of the Olympics and concluded, and I quote, "The Olympics are a money-losing proposition for host cities. They result in positive net benefits only under very specific and unusual circumstances. Furthermore, the cost-benefit proposition is worse for cities in developing countries than those in the industrialized world." So the Rio Olympics are clearly not an effective method of raising money, rather damaging the economy of an already suffering developing country, possibly resulting in a multi-billion-dollar loss. This truly demonstrates how the harm done by the Rio Olympics greatly outweighs the good. Even with all profits brought in by tourism and tickets combined, the Olympics are still a major net loss for Rio de Janeiro. Now, for my second point, I'll discuss the alternate ways of investing the $20 billion that went into the Olympic Games so as to legitimately benefit the population of Rio de Janeiro in the years to come. The Rio Olympic Games cost around $20 billion to host, and almost certainly ran a net loss, likely over $1 billion. In return, the city of Rio de Janeiro was given absolutely no useful infrastructure, but a complex of sports facilities that will likely go unused just like almost every other Olympic stadium. Going into the future, how could this be of any help to the people of Rio de Janeiro? A multi-billion-dollar investment into an unprofitable sporting event should have been at the bottom of Rio's priority list, given their current economic circumstances. Rio needs to be focusing on investments that actually benefit its population, such as medical and educational facilities, infrastructure that has been shown time and time again to be absolutely vital in the development of a successful nation. How can Rio be focusing on a mere sporting event
when 6% of its population live in slums, according to the Brazilian Institute of Geography and Statistics. 11.4 million people in poorly constructed shanties with little to no access to the public services that we take for granted. How do you think the poverty-stricken masses of Rio de Janeiro feel about their government spending $20 billion on an unprofitable sporting event that lasts only for 16 days? By neglecting those less fortunate and instead focusing on an inconsequential sporting event, the Brazilian government have truly betrayed their country. So, with all of this in mind, Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, it is clear for all to see that the opposing team's claim that the harm done by the Olympics does not outweigh the good is truly an absurd one, as by wasting billions of dollars that should have been otherwise spent improving the
I call upon the second negative speaker, Olivia Cameron.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen. I, Olivia Cameron, am here to convince you that the Olympics did not do more harm than good for Rio. First, I will rebut some of the points made by the opposition. The second speaker claimed that the money spent on the stadiums for the Olympics will just be wasted, as in the past, most Olympic stadiums have fallen into disuse. While this is true for stadiums like the Bird's Nest from the 2008 Beijing Olympics, it is not true in the case of Rio, as the stadium used for the opening and closing ceremonies has existed since the 1950s, and the stadium used for athletics has existed since 2007. These stadiums were just simply renovated for the Olympics, and they will also be used after the Games. The second speaker talked about how the Olympics are for profit. Whilst we understand this, what mega event is actually for profit? Ladies and gentlemen, the Olympics are always about pride, patriotism, and sportsmanship. It's not always about the net cost. Money can be obtained, but a reputation is harder to get. The second speaker stated that the Olympics would just do harm to the Brazilian economy. This is untrue, as according to Andrew Rose from the University of Southern California, countries that host the Olympics have a 30% increase in trade after doing so, compared to countries that do not host the Olympics. Our first speaker, Ben, has already discussed the dismal history of Rio and its current problems, how the Olympics were a morale boost for the city, the pride, good reputation, and benefits a host city gains, as well as the negative impact the media had prior to the Games. In my speech, I will discuss how the harm the Olympics caused to Rio was balanced out by the jobs it created and infrastructure it built. My first point is that the Olympics created thousands of jobs for Rio locals in many different fields. According to the Rio 2016 website, 85,000 jobs were created by third-party businesses and 5,000 were created by the IOC in preparation for the Games. That's a total of 90,000, ladies and gentlemen, a great boost considering the unemployment statistics that Ben mentioned earlier. These jobs were also well-paying, as according to the Rio Times, the people employed by the Olympic Committee were paid between 2,000 and 6,000 Brazilian reals. Considering that the average Brazilian salary is 2,029 reals, according to Trading Economics, ladies and gentlemen, this is an impressive salary. 50,000 jobs in construction to build facilities for the Olympics were also created, according to the Daily Mail, prior to 2016. Additionally, Olympic sponsors Coca-Cola employed many young people from Brazil, from Rio's favelas, according to sharedvalue.org. Although these jobs were only temporary, they provided locals with a host of new skills and gave them something impressive to write on their resume that will hopefully secure them a job in the future. The creation of jobs by the Olympics was a real positive to Rio that counteracted some of the bad. My final point is that the Olympics brought many infrastructure improvements which were beneficial to all citizens of Rio. While we acknowledge that the new infrastructure projects were expensive, the money spent was a wonderful and worthwhile investment. These investments include the athletic stadium, which will be opened as a leisure area, the handball venue, which will be transformed into multiple schools, the 70 new hotels built, providing tourist and business opportunities, and the aquatic stadium, which will become open to the locals. The infrastructure investments also improved already existing infrastructure. For example, according to the Rio Times, because of the Olympics, many bus routes are being expanded and roads upgraded, which has caused a 4.8% increase in the transportation industry and has created many permanent jobs, such as bus drivers, according to the Washington Post. Citizens have wanted these upgrades for a long time and are glad the Olympics are causing them to happen. These upgrades are also permanent and will serve the people long after the Olympics is gone. With all of these positive infrastructure projects in mind, we can see that the good brought from the Olympics was equal to the bad. Ladies and gentlemen, in my speech, I have shown you that the Olympics gave jobs to the locals and improved infrastructure and transportation services which were wanted by all citizens of Rio. This good helped to balance the scale of good and bad that the Olympics brought to Rio. Thank you.
call upon the third affirmative speaker, Annika Turon-Simmons.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen. The topic for tonight's debate is that the Olympics did more harm than good for Rio. We, the affirmative team, strongly believe this statement to be true. Before I begin my summary, I will point out the flaws in the opposition's case. The first speaker talked about the boosted pride and the pride of the favelas. We agree there'd be a sense of pride and social cohesion due to the Olympics, and that may last from several weeks to several months. However, it can't last forever. In the short term, yes, the Olympics will provide Rio with a sense of pride. However, in the long term, how will this pride really benefit Rio? It won't help in rebuilding hospitals, and it surely won't help in Rio's economic crisis. Surely the morale of someone in a rundown hospital is less than high, and as the Chicago Tribune reports, hospitals and police stations are without the most basic necessities such as toilet paper. Is this raising a country's pride, ladies and gentlemen? Although hosting the Olympics may create a superficial feel-good effect, it is not helping Rio's current situation, financially or socially, and is therefore causing more harm than good. He talked about favela pride, and in more detail, he talked about the achievements of a single person from the favelas. Ladies and gentlemen, this is anecdotal and does not discount the fact that 25% of the population are living in these conditions, and 90% of the 600 residents of the favela community on the edge of the Olympic domes are being forcibly removed for a mega event that has lasted little more than a fortnight. This is exactly why the Olympics are doing more harm than good. The first speaker talked about problems prior to the Games. This may be true, however, this does not discount the fact the problems caused by the Games. As our second speaker stated, the Games caused great economic instability and discord, and as our first speaker stated, the Olympic Games only deepened the distrust between the people of the Rio and the government. Ladies and gentlemen, every country has problems. We are arguing that the Olympic Games has only increased Rio's problems. The second speaker talked about how Rio's stadiums will be reused. She mentioned 2 out of the many venues that have been built and that will be reused. We would like to ask what will happen to the rest of these venues. The cost of maintaining these facilities is just one number to add to the total cost of the amount of money that isn't going where it should be. The Greek and Sydney Games are a perfect example of this, with the unused stadiums costing $40 million every year, as stated by economist Benjamin Wagar. The use or lack thereof of facilities post major events of the Olympics is troubling. The large sums of money spent on these entertainment events seemingly disappearing down the drain every year with the maintenance of unused venues. The second speaker talked about more jobs. While the Olympics will create jobs, they are only temporary. These jobs will last no longer than the duration of the Olympics and will leave people jobless once they have finished. In fact, the Olympics has actually contributed to job loss, with over 75% of people working in the Maracana Stadium laid off to make way for Olympic organisers' own workers, as stated by The Guardian. This is not creating jobs, this is just replacing workers. To further this point, as our first speaker stated, the working standards in Rio are less than enviable, as reported by the Global News, with workers found in slave-like contracts and conditions. The Olympics have not created jobs, nor raised working standards. In fact, they've only encouraged poor working conditions, and that is why they've created more harm than good. The second speaker talked about how infrastructure will be built and improvements are beneficial. The investment in often impoverished parts of inner cities can deliver economic and social benefits for generations. With this aim in mind, the London Olympics redeveloped the much poorer areas. 4 years on, ordinary people in less affluent parts of London have benefited from the investment at the time of government cuts. The Rio Games, by contrast, will be hosted almost entirely in the city's wealthy area districts, with relatively few resources focused on the city's poorer residents. This will only increase social division between the poor and the rich, and that's why the Olympics have created more harm than good. The second speaker talked about better transport. We agree, improved transport is always beneficial. However, when you look at the state of Rio's hospitals and schools, can you really argue that we should be spending more money on improving transport? The citizens of Rio made their voice heard when the protesters covered one of the new light service rail systems with the slogan, "Fancy transport, trashy hospitals. What kind of country is that?" The Olympic Games have deepened the distrust between people of Rio and its government and have caused more harm than good with its flashy transportation systems, of which the money invested could have been put towards much better causes. To summarise, our first speaker, Charlotte, talked about the social issues concerning the Games and the tarnished reputation and heavy social conflict affecting Rio. Our second speaker, Ned, gave us some compelling arguments explaining the economic issues Rio is facing. In conclusion, while the Olympics are recognised as an event that supports the world of sport, we believe that Rio is an example of political will rather than moral.
I call upon the third negative speaker, Jake Reed.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, and of course, adjudicators. My name is Jake Reedman, and I'm here to talk on the topic that the Rio de Janeiro Olympic Games did more harm than good. First, I will point out some errors in the opposition's speeches. The opposition argued that billions of dollars were wasted on infrastructure projects that will just be abandoned after the Olympics. This is completely untrue, as the João Havelange Stadium used for athletics already existed since 2007 and is being used for important events like Pan American Games and Justin Bieber's World Tour. Clearly. The stadium just had its capacity increased for the Olympics and will continue to be used after the Games as the home ground for the football team Botafogo. The renovations only cost an estimated 10% of the cost of building a completely new stadium. The opposition have also told you that the past Olympic stadiums and facilities have fallen into disuse in the past and have been completely neglected. This sadly is true. And up until recently, a lot of these stadiums were wasted. But some of these stadiums, most notably the ones in Athens, have a new lease of life and are currently housing stranded refugees. The hockey stadium from Athens 2004, which was abandoned due to the Greek economic crisis, now houses over 3,000 refugees who cannot pass through Macedonia to Sweden and Germany. Other Olympic venues from Greece that now host refugees include the canoeing venue and the baseball venue. The opposition stated that media make Rio look bad, but I ask you, ladies and gentlemen, if during the lead up to the world's biggest sporting event, would you watch a news report talking about how smoothly everything is running and how fine and dandy it all is? Well, that's right, you wouldn't. Media companies, of course, exaggerate, and as we know now, according to a recent Harvard study, journalists are 60% more likely to focus on negative aspects than positive aspects in their stories. The first speaker, Charlotte, also said that the Rio's economy is in shambles because of the Games. However, this argument is flawed, as Rio's was already in the worst economic recession since 1930. This is because Rio's main exports are sugar, oil, and coffee. These are all undergoing market slumps at the moment, and that's not because of the Olympics. We all know about the oil market slumping, for sellers, not buyers, which means that Rio is having a hard time coping with their three main markets slumping. The opposition also told you that the achievements of Rafael Silva do not bring light to the whole lower class of Rio. However, Rio's legacy fund has the equivalent of 200,000 AU dollars to help support people living in disadvantaged areas such as favelas. Also, the financial services company UBS said that because of the attractive opportunities for investors in stocks and bonds will lift Rio right out of its economic recession. Ned has told you that the Olympic Games are only profitable in very specific circumstances, but unfortunately did not include what circumstances these were. How are we to know if Rio was or was not falling under these circumstances if the criteria was not shown to us? Ladies and gentlemen, I would also like to remind you the opposition cannot show you how Rio's Olympics did more harm than good if they do not acknowledge the good the Olympics have also done. You simply cannot say that one side of the scale is heavier than the other without explaining what is on the other side. We believe that the affirmative team has not acknowledged the good things that have occurred as a result of the Rio Olympic Games and have only showed us negative effects without any context to put that in. The opposition speaker also told you that the Olympics may not turn a profit, but in the end, not everything needs to turn a profit. The lasting infrastructure gains, such as new roads and public transport, boost public happiness, which in the end is what the government wants. Now that I have rebutted, I will summarise our team's case. Our first speaker, Ben, talked to you about Rio's history and how it's been so troubled in the past. Rio is a city of contrast. There is huge wealth and huge poverty, all in a relatively small pace. Ben's second point was about previous Olympic cities and the impact the Olympic Games had on them. Hosting the Olympic Games is not just expense for Rio. It brings in a huge amount of money from tourism, improved transport that the citizens can make use of, and more. The last point Ben made was about how the media impacts our perception of the Olympic Games. The media's job is to sell their story, and so they will naturally exaggerate on things. Our second speaker, Liv, talked to you about employment opportunities, economic boosts, and the moral benefits of the Olympics in Rio. Ladies and gentlemen, in my speech tonight, I have shown you the inconsistencies and errors in the opposition speech and reaffirmed my team's arguments. By showing you the balance of good and bad the Rio Olympic Games has done, we have convinced you easily that the Rio Olympic Games certainly did not do more harm than good.
Please wait while the adjudicators finalise the results.
You guys can talk quietly amongst yourselves.